Hello, my friends, and welcome to Storyroom. I'm so happy you're here. Find a comfortable place to sit, take a slow, deep breath, and let's travel back in time together. Imagine that you're visiting an old library in Paris. You're there for one reason, to read the private notebooks of one of the greatest scientists in history. You ask the librarian to bring them to you. Instead, you're handed a document and told, before you can touch these notebooks, you must sign this. It's not a permission form. It's a safety warning. More than 100 years after they were written, the notebooks are still radioactive. They are kept inside specially designed lead-lined boxes because lead blocks harmful radiation. Anyone who wants to study them must take special precautions. Just imagine that for a moment. A notebook so powerful that, even after a century, it still carries the invisible energy of the person who once held it. Those remarkable notebooks belong to Marie Curie, and this is her extraordinary story. Our story begins in 1867 in the city of Warsaw, Poland. A little girl named Maria Sklodowska was born into a world that offered her very few opportunities. Years later, the world would know her by another name, Marie Curie. But before she became one of history's greatest scientists, she was simply a curious child growing up in a country that wasn't truly free. At that time, Poland was under control of the Russian Empire. The Russian government decided what children could study, what language they could speak in school, and even what history they were allowed to learn. Polish history was forbidden. The Polish language was pushed aside. Every lesson had to be taught in Russian. Maria's father was a mathematics and physics teacher. He loved science and believed that education could change a person's life. But because the Russian authorities did not trust him, he lost his respected teaching position. Overnight, the family's financial situation became much harder. Even so, he never gave up his love of learning. At home, he kept scientific instruments, glass tubes, measuring devices, and delicate pieces of laboratory equipment. While other children played with toys, young Maria would spend hours studying these strange objects. She wanted to know how they worked. More importantly, she wanted to know how the world worked. Her curiosity seemed endless. She learned to read when she was only 4 years old, and she possessed an astonishing memory. Once she learned something, she rarely forgot it. In school, she impressed every teacher she met. Even though every lesson was taught in Russian, Maria answered question after question with confidence and accuracy. It quickly became clear that she was an exceptional student. But no matter how brilliant she was, there was one dream she wasn't allowed to pursue. Women could not attend the University of Warsaw, not because they lacked intelligence, not because they couldn't succeed, simply because they were women. For Maria, that closed door was heartbreaking. She dreamed of becoming a scientist, yet the path she wanted to follow simply didn't exist. Most people would have accepted that reality. Maria didn't. Instead, she and other determined young women created their own opportunity. Together, they joined a secret school known as the Floating University. Its name came from the fact that it never stayed in one place for long. One week, classes might be held in someone's kitchen. The next week, they would quietly gather in a different house, hidden away in a back room. The locations changed constantly to avoid the attention of the Russian police. If they were discovered, everyone involved could be arrested. Still, they continued learning. Knowledge, they believed, was worth the risk. Around this time, Maria and her older sister, Bronya, made a promise that would shape both of their lives. It was a simple plan, but one that demanded years of sacrifice. Maria would work as a governess, teaching children for wealthy families, and she would send nearly all of her earnings to Paris so that Bronya could study medicine. Then, once Bronya became a doctor, she would help Maria achieve her own dream of studying science. It was an act of remarkable trust. Neither sister knew how long it would take. They only knew they believed in each other. For the next 5 years, Maria lived far from home, teaching other people's children while putting her own ambitions on hold. Almost every coin she earned was sent to Paris. She kept only enough money to survive, yet she refused to let those years slip away. Late at night, after the children had gone to bed and the house had fallen silent, she opened her books. She studied mathematics. She studied physics. She studied chemistry. She wrote long letters to Bronya, asking for books, advice, and new ideas to explore. Without professors, without classrooms, and without a university, Maria became her own teacher. Every evening brought another lesson. Every page she read brought her one step closer to the future she refused to stop believing in. Then, at last, her patience was rewarded. At the age of 24, Maria boarded a train bound for Paris. The year was 1891. She had no idea that the journey ahead would change not only her own life, but the history of science forever. When Maria arrived in Paris, she had reached the heart of the scientific world. The city was home to the Sorbonne, one of Europe's most respected universities. Unlike the universities in Warsaw, the Sorbonne welcomed women. For the first time, Maria had the opportunity she had dreamed about for years. As she began this new chapter, she made a small but meaningful change. She changed the spelling of her name from the Polish Maria to the French Marie. She wasn't leaving her past behind. She was simply embracing the future that lay ahead. But life in Paris was far from comfortable. Marie rented a tiny room close to the university. There was no heating during the harsh winters. The cold was so intense that she could see her own breath inside the room. Some mornings, even the water in her wash basin had frozen solid overnight. Money was always in short supply. On many days, a piece of bread and a little chocolate were all she could afford to eat. Sometimes she became so weak from hunger that she fainted during her lectures. Most people would have given up. Marie never did. Every morning, she walked into the lecture halls of the Sorbonne as one of only a handful of women. Some students stared. Some professors questioned whether a woman belonged there at all. Marie ignored them. Her eyes stayed on the blackboard. Her notebooks quickly filled with equations, ideas, and careful observations. While others rested, she continued studying. While others slept, she kept reading. Her determination was stronger than her exhaustion. In 1893, all of that hard work paid off. Marie earned her degree in physics and graduated first in her class. Just 1 year later, she completed a second degree in mathematics, graduating second in her class. Think about what that really means. She was living in a freezing room. She often went hungry. She was studying in a language that wasn't her own. And despite every obstacle, she became one of the brightest students at one of the greatest universities in Europe. But her greatest discoveries were still ahead of her. It was during those years in Paris that Marie met a quiet, thoughtful physicist named Pierre Curie. Their first conversations were about science. Soon, they were talking about everything. They shared the same curiosity, the same passion for discovery, and the same belief that knowledge could change the world. In 1895, they married. Marie didn't wear an expensive white wedding dress. Instead, she chose a simple dark blue dress. It wasn't a fashion statement. It was practical. She couldn't afford a dress she would wear only once, so she chose one she could continue wearing in the laboratory. That simple choice says a great deal about the kind of person she was. For Marie, science mattered more than appearances. The couple began working together in a small laboratory that was anything but impressive. The roof leaked when it rained. It was bitterly cold in winter and unbearably hot in summer. The space was cramped, damp, and poorly equipped. Few people would have imagined that one of the greatest scientific discoveries in history would come from such an ordinary place. But Marie and Pierre weren't interested in comfort. They were interested in answers. Around that time, a French scientist named Henri Becquerel had discovered something strange. Certain minerals seemed to give off invisible rays without any obvious source of energy. No one could explain why. Most scientists found the mystery fascinating. Marie decided to solve it. She spent countless hours measuring, testing, recording, and repeating experiments. Slowly, the answer began to emerge. She realized these mysterious rays were not created by chemical reactions. They came from deep inside the atoms themselves. In other words, the energy was part of the material's very nature. It was a discovery that completely changed humanity's understanding of matter. Marie knew this extraordinary phenomenon needed a name. She called it radioactivity. The word comes from the Latin word radius, meaning ray. It perfectly described materials that constantly release invisible energy. Today, the word is used all over the world. It began with Marie Curie. Then came an even greater breakthrough. In 1898, Marie and Pierre announced that they had discovered not one, but two entirely new chemical elements. The first was polonium. Marie named it after her homeland, Poland. At the time, Poland had disappeared from the map of Europe, divided between powerful neighboring empires. By naming the element after her country, Marie was sending a quiet but powerful message. She was telling the world that Poland still existed in the hearts of its people. The second new element was radium. Its name came from the Latin word for ray, because it continuously gave off energy. Unlike anything scientists had ever seen before, radium produced a faint blue glow in the darkness. Late at night, after long hours of work, Marie and Pierre would sometimes see the tiny glass containers glowing softly on the laboratory shelves. It must have felt almost magical, a light that seemed to come from nowhere, a light hidden inside ordinary rock. But that beautiful glow came at an enormous cost. To extract even a tiny amount of pure radium, Marie and Pierre processed several tons of pitchblende, a heavy black mineral. They stirred boiling mixtures by hand. They carried heavy containers. They filtered, heated, crushed, and separated chemicals over and over again. The work lasted not for days or weeks, but for years. It was exhausting, dirty, and physically demanding, yet they refused to give up. With patience, determination, and an unshakable belief in discovery, they revealed something the world had never seen before. And in doing so, they changed science forever. Years of exhausting work had finally begun to pay off. Day after day, Marie and Pierre stirred heavy mixtures, lifted enormous containers, and processed tons of ordinary rock. It was slow, physically demanding work that tested both their strength and their patience. But little by little, something extraordinary appeared. From mountains of dull black, or came a tiny substance that glowed with a faint blue light. It was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The scientific community quickly realized that Marie and Pierre had made one of the greatest discoveries of their time. In 1903, Marie Curie was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics, one of the highest honors a scientist can receive. The prize recognized groundbreaking discoveries that changed the way humanity understood the world. She shared the award with Pierre Curie and Henri Becquerel, whose earlier research had inspired their work. That day made history. Marie Curie became the first woman ever to receive a Nobel Prize. It was an extraordinary achievement, but life was about to test her in a way no scientific challenge ever could. 3 years later, in 1906, tragedy struck without warning. On a rainy afternoon in Paris, Pierre Curie was walking across a busy street. The roads were slippery, the traffic was noisy, and horse-drawn wagons crowded the city. In a single heartbreaking moment, a heavy carriage rounded a corner too quickly. Pierre had no time to react. He was struck and killed. He was only 46 years old. For Marie, the loss was devastating. She had lost far more than her husband. She had lost a person who shared her dreams, her closest friend, her research partner, and the one person who believed in her without question. For a long time, the future must have seemed painfully empty. Many people expected her to leave science behind. Instead, she found the strength to continue. Soon afterward, the University of Paris offered Marie the teaching position that Pierre had once held. She accepted. With that decision, she became the first woman to serve as a full professor at the Sorbonne. When she entered the lecture hall for her first class, every seat was filled. Students, journalists, professors, and curious visitors had gathered to witness a historic moment. Marie walked calmly to the front of the room, opened her notes, and began speaking. She didn't begin with a new introduction. She didn't explain what had happened. Instead, she continued Pierre's last lecture from the exact sentence where he had stopped, as if his work was simply continuing through her. The audience listened in complete silence. It was one of the most powerful moments of her life. 5 years later, history repeated itself. In 1911, Marie Curie received the second Nobel Prize, this time in chemistry, for discovering polonium and radium and for successfully isolating pure radium. No one had ever achieved anything quite like it. Even today, Marie Curie remains the only person to win Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific fields. Yet success did not protect her from prejudice. Despite her achievements, the French Academy of Sciences refused to elect her as a member. She lost a vote by just one ballot, not because her science was questioned, not because her discoveries were unimportant, but largely because she was a woman. Even after changing the world, she still had to fight for acceptance. But Marie refused to let disappointment define her. When the First World War began, she turned her attention from the laboratory to the battlefield. She realized that thousands of wounded soldiers were dying because doctors couldn't see bullets or broken bones hidden inside their bodies. So she designed mobile X-ray units that could travel directly to military hospitals near the front lines. These remarkable vehicles became known as the Little Curies. Marie didn't simply invent them. She drove many of them herself. She trained doctors, nurses, and technicians to operate the machines, often working only a short distance from active fighting. Thanks to her efforts, it is estimated that more than 1 million wounded soldiers received faster and more accurate medical treatment. Once again, Marie Curie proved that science could save lives. By the early 1930s, however, years of working with radioactive materials had begun to take their toll. At that time, scientists still didn't fully understand the dangers of long-term radiation exposure. Marie handled radioactive substances with her bare hands. She carried them in her pockets. She kept glowing samples on her desk because she found their soft blue light beautiful. Slowly, and without anyone realizing it, the radiation was damaging her body. In 1934, Marie Curie died at the age of 66 from aplastic anemia, a disease that prevents the bone marrow from producing enough healthy blood cells. The invisible force she had discovered had quietly claimed her life. Even today, her laboratory notebooks remain radioactive. More than a century later, they are still stored inside specially designed lead-lined boxes, and anyone wishing to study them must wear protective clothing. Her discoveries continue to shape medicine, chemistry, and physics. The element polonium still bears the name of her beloved homeland. The element radium remains one of the most famous discoveries in scientific history, and Marie Curie's legacy continues to inspire people all around the world. As our journey comes to an end, there's one lesson from Marie Curie's life that is impossible to ignore. Again and again, the world told her she didn't belong. The doors were closed. The opportunities were limited. The obstacles seemed impossible. Yet she kept moving forward, quietly, patiently, one step at a time. Somewhere in that cold laboratory in Paris, a tiny blue light shone in the darkness. It wasn't just the glow of radium. It was the light of perseverance, the light of curiosity, the light of someone who refused to give up. And perhaps that's the most powerful part of her story. Maybe you're learning English right now, and some days it feels difficult. Maybe new words are hard to remember. Maybe your progress feels slower than you'd like. But every page you read, every story you listen to, every sentence you understand, every new word you learn, they're all small lights. You may not notice them every day. Other people may not notice them either. But they're growing. Just as Marie Curie spent years building something the world couldn't yet see, you're building something inside yourself every single day. Keep learning. Keep believing. Keep moving forward. One small step at a time. Thank you for joining me for this incredible journey through the life of Marie Curie. If her story inspired you, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What amazed you the most? Was it her determination to overcome every obstacle? Her 2 Nobel Prizes? Or the remarkable discovery of the glowing element, radium? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to explore the next adventure waiting for you here on Storyrium. Until next time, take care of yourself, stay curious, and never stop learning.